The first sessions in the morning were kind of like undergraduate activism school, okay? And now what we're going to do is we're going to move into kind of like graduate level activism school, okay? So this is stuff I learned from the New Organizing Institute, which is based off the Obama Bootcamps. The second session is stuff from a session called Building to Scale, which is kind of like their advanced organizer training, but I think most of the lessons in there apply to people that are working in decentralized groups. Like yourselves. And then this second session, this fourth session is about brand strategy, which is something I learned from a guy named Bill Moyer from the Backbone campaign in Washington State. He learned from a guy named Chuck Spinney, who learned a lot of this way of thinking from a guy named Colonel John Boyd. And John Boyd was a colonel for the United States Air Force who worked out of the Pentagon, and he's kind of known as the American Sun Tzu. And he talked about Sun Tzu, which is like a famous military strategist from Asia. And they took those things and applied them in politics, mainly because the conservatives had already done it. There's a much longer story I can tell you about that if you're interested. But they were using kind of things that this guy had created inside the Pentagon in our domestic politics. And he went to the Democrats of the time, it was Tip O'Neill and those folks, and said, hey, this guy gave this presentation from the Pentagon to the Republicans, and they're using it against you. You know, we can have him come and give you the presentation too, because Boyd wasn't like really either way. He was just kind of anti-fascist, right, in a way, and pro-American. And the Democrats, when they heard this offer, they were like, no, thank you, that sounds unseemly, right? And unseemly. Yeah, and so the next 40 to 50 years of American politics, the Democrats kept showing up to the baseball field where we thought we were going to play with our balls and our mitts and our bats. And the other side showed up with the equivalent of tanks and airplanes and, rocket-propelled grenade launchers. So they're just playing a completely different thing. At the end of the day, we come back to the same point, which is that we need to be a visionary. We're on the side of the visionary good and the collective good. And our opponents are on the side of using fear to create enemies within and without in order to pit us against each other. But in between those two things, there's a set of tools that I want to equip you with, because when I was equipped with them, it not only changed the way I operated politically, but it honestly changed the way I operated in my personal life as well. It really clarified a framework for action that I found to be incredibly effective for what do you want to do? You want to start a business, you want to create a church, you want to pass a bill. These things are very helpful. It's a set of tools, and you can build a house with a hammer, or you can break a window, right? And so we can use these same tools to build a better house, a more perfect union. So I want to equip you with those tools today. So there's a book called The War of Art, and my favorite quote from this book is, the more scared we are of a work or calling, the more sure we can be that we have to do it. Resistance is experienced as fear. The degree of fear equates to the strength of resistance, and that's why we feel so much resistance. If it meant nothing to us, there'd be no resistance. So if you're paralyzed with fear, it's a good sign. It shows you what you have to do. And this is exactly how I felt, and I know many of us felt, on that dark day in November of 2016. Paralyzed with fear. I literally sat, when I realized what was going to happen, I sat on a curb in New York City for an hour, staring at a hat. Like, oh my God, like, what are we going to do? And then we got up and we started taking action. Over the course of time, many of you have also done that on a different timeline perhaps, but we've all kind of found each other and we're all part of this resistance now because of the fear we experience. But we can't be a fear-based movement. The other side can. We have to be a movement that's really operating out of love. But understand that our fear is based on what we love. We're scared for the things we love. We're scared for the people we love. We're scared for this country that we love and for the people in the world that can be negatively impacted. So we need to realize that as strong as your fear is, that's as strong as your resistance to Trump and the people in this world that are making it a worse place, not a better place. And understand that if your fear is really strong, that's how strong the resistance can be as well. So the more afraid you are, in a way, the better. You can kind of see that in the country, right? There's 6 million people in the streets. They're there because they're scared, because of what they love. This is a guy named Stefan Hassel. He wrote a book called Indinez-vous, which means A Time for Outrage. And this was a book that was translated into about 30 different languages at the time. He was a French resistance fighter in World War II, and so he literally fought Nazis. And he said, that at the time was a time for outrage. And this is even before Trump, he says, this is a time for outrage too. What I see going on in the world, it's a time for outrage. And this tract, which is about this big, maybe 50 pages, got translated and inspired activist movements from Spain with the Indignados, who that word translates as the outraged. It inspired the Tunisian Revolution, which inspired the Arab Spring. It inspired organizations like UK Uncut and equivalents in America like Occupy Wall Street. Really started from the words of this man, Stefan Hassel, calling and saying, a clarion call to the world before he died, saying, this is a time for outrage. But the most powerful thing he says in this book is the very end. He says, to resist is to create, and to create is to resist. And what I think he meant by that is our resistance can't be only against. We can't be only against Trump, right? What we have to do is create something in the world and think of a world that we want to create, because that in itself is the resistance, right? Creating an alternative world, creating an alternative vision that people can see. And that's the strength of our resistance, right? Is the strength of our vision that we're presenting to other people. So this has to be a creative enterprise. It can't be, it can't just be against. We have to be for. And so we have to figure out what we're for. And that's going to be the root of our strength. And if you want to have an effective civil resistance, there's a great book written called Why Civil Resistance Works by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan. There's actually Maria Stefan's mother is here, which I'm so heartened to see. We talked a little bit. This is probably some of the most formative work in activism that has ever been done. They sat down and they looked at conflicts for the last 100 years. The book is Why Civil Resistance Works. Do you have that copy? So it looks like this. It's got the resistance fist with the peace sign, so you can find it on Amazon or at your local bookstore. This is an incredibly powerful book. They looked at the last 100 years of violent and nonviolent conflict, and they said, okay, what works better? What they found is that violence is actually 2 to 3 times less effective than nonviolent resistance. And then they explain why that is and use a series of case studies. So the first thing I want to point out is that over time, so this is the 1940s and this is the early 2000s, that success of nonviolent resistance is actually going up over time, and the success of violent resistance is going down over time. So violent resistance is becoming less common and less effective. Nonviolent resistance is becoming more common and more effective. And what they found is that violent or nonviolent, any revolution that achieved the active participation of 3.5% of the population on a sustained basis would win. So you don't need everybody to win. We don't need to convince even 50% to win. But if you get 3.5% of the population engaged on an active and sustained basis, the data says from the last 100 years, you're going to win. No revolution lost that reached that level of popular support, right? Here's the other kicker. No violent revolution ever reached 3.5% of the population. Only nonviolent revolutions got that high. And some won with lower levels of support, but no violent revolution was able to reach this 3.5% metric. And here's why. If you think about the fact that you have to get 3.5% of the population, right? If you take 100%, right, you just have to get 3.5%. That means you have to get about 1 out of every 30 people to participate in the revolution, right? It's a lot. In America, it's like 9 million people, right? So by that 6 million figure at the beginning, you remember that, the sources of our power? 6 million, we're 2/3 of the way there, right? So we need 9 million adults in America to participate to create a revolution in this country. And that means we need to get one of about every 30. So every 30 people we talk to, we need to get one of them actively engaged, right? But if you're going to be violent, here's the problem. It's a barrier to entry. Violence is a barrier to entry, because if you're going to practice violence, I'm not going to be part of your revolution, right? If somebody's going to practice violence, are you going to be part of their revolution? No. And that's everybody in this room for the most part, right? what they found in the data was something like only 18 to 45-year-old males or something like that who are willing to hurt other people for political purposes are willing to engage in violence, right? So that's an incredibly narrow part of the population. Most women are not going to do it. A lot of men are not going to do it. Clergy's not going to do it. Artists, intellectuals, academics, artists, the list goes on and on. The people who make up a movement, right, don't want to participate in a revolution if it's going to be violent. And so let's be generous to the violence. Let's say they get that 10% of the population is those men between the ages of 18 and 45 who are willing to commit violence for political purposes. Let's say it's 10, I think it's less. But if it's 10%, and you got to get 3.5% of the entire population out of this 10%, that means you got to get 1 out of 3 of those people who fit that demographic. You got to be batting Hall of Fame batting percentages, right? You got to be 300, right, in order to win, because you have to get 30% of the people you talk to get actively engaged, right? So if we're nonviolent, we got to get 1 out of 30. If you're violent, you got to get 1 out of 3. So what it means is, as a recruiting tactic, nonviolence is 10 times more effective than violence, right? So that's why, I have moral and philosophical reasons for practicing nonviolence as well, and spiritual reasons. But if you look at the data and the science of it, the science is on our side as well. So we're going to be a nonviolent resistance, okay? How many guys? Are you okay with that? All right. Okay. But just because we're nonviolent does not mean an active or passive, right? And many of the leaders of nonviolence were very affirmative at this point. There's a guy named Clausewitz, and he says that war is politics by other means, right? And when we have a civil resistance, what I want you to think about is a war of persistence to determine whose vision becomes reality. It's a war, it's an adversarial contest. There are people's interests who are aligned against our own. The Koch brothers want to burn the world down and make money doing it. I want to go to war with that ideology, right? And collapse their will to resist. I don't want them to burn the world down. It's a war of persistence. They did a study of the most successful CEOs, right, Fortune 500 companies, to identify the one characteristic that they all shared, and it was persistence. That persistence is the thing that's going to keep us going. When you lose and you fail better faster, and you keep coming back, and keep coming back, and keep coming back, eventually, especially when it comes to politicians and laws, eventually they're just going to give you what you want to get you the hell out of their face, right? Like, if you keep being persistent, that is the key to winning in politics, because there's a million ways for a bill to die. For example, there's only one way to win. So your bill is going to die over and over and over again, and then one day it will live. But that persistence is the key. And the benefit we get from that is that we have a vision of the world, right? We get out of the DeLorean, the time machine, with Doc, and we see how the world looks, and it's awesome. Or it's horrible, because there's other people out there, our adversaries, they have a vision of the world too, right? The Koch brothers' vision is literally that the world burns down, and they made a ton of money doing it. That vision can become reality. And so the contest isn't between really men and women on this earth, right? It's between ideologies and visions, right? Whose vision will take over reality, because only one way will win. And so we want our way to win. I want a more equitable, just, and free world. And there are people who don't want that. So I'm going to engage in civil resistance to make sure that those people don't win, and that their vision doesn't become reality. And at the highest levels of grand strategy, which is what they call it in the military, 5-star generals practice something called operational art. I think this is really interesting to me. By the way, that is Bob Ross painting Liberty Union people, if you're wondering. But at the highest levels of the military, they actually consider military campaigns an artistic endeavor. It's a creative endeavor, right? It's not like Matt and Lesher. They figure out how to arrange the tactics that are available to them. Remember the resources we have right now, right? Not the ones we'll have someday, not when we have laser weapons, but what do we have right now? They arrange those tactics over time to achieve strategic goals against our adversaries. So it's adversarial contest. We have strategic goals, right? Theory of change. And we want to arrange our tactics over time in order to achieve those strategic goals. And that's operational art. So how can you be creative, right, in the way that you're using the tactics you have? You have phone banking and calling, right? That's pretty traditional in an electoral campaign. Like how can you use those creatively? Maybe you call into the district of that representative to get his voters to call him and say, hey, I want you to pass this bill. That's an adaptation of a tactic, right? So think creatively about the tactics you have. Don't just think, don't just do what's always been done. We want to be practicing operational art. And Boyd, who is, again, the American Sun Tzu, he was a fighter pilot. And he came back, I think it was World War II or the Korean War, and they said, hey, Boyd, you're our best pilot. We want you to teach the other pilots how to be good like you. And he's like, well, I don't know what makes a good pilot. And they're like, figure it out. So Boyd came up with this idea. His name was 40-second Boyd because he could line up somebody in his crosshairs within 40 seconds in a dogfight and never lost the bet, right? So he was like literally the best fighter pilot we ever had. The FX, which became the F-15, was redesigned around this principle and some of other Boyd's principles, and then the F-16 was created from scratch around his principles, and I don't think it was ever shot down in air-to-air combat. So what Boyd says is, look, when you're up in a plane in a dogfight, this isn't how you should think. This is just how you do think, okay? You observe what's going on around you, you orient yourself to those observations, you make a decision, and then you take action. And then you go back to observation. And this is what everybody does. This is just what you do. This isn't how you should think. This is just how you do think. You observe, orient, decide, act, back to observation. Right? What effect did my action have on what I'm observing now? And that informs the next decision that you make. Okay? It's relatively straightforward. It seems simple, but here's the cool part. What he says is, if I can get inside my opponent's OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, right? I can get inside their loop, so I'm making decisions like this, and they're making decisions like this. I'm observing, orienting, deciding, and acting by the time they're observing and orienting. So eventually, I'm making better decisions faster, and they end up in my crosshairs, right? So what he says is, this is my paraphrase of it, whoever makes better decisions faster wins. So it's not just making better decisions, right, on whatever timeline, 5 years from now. We have the definite best decision. It's not about making faster decisions. You can make really stupid decisions fast, right? But it's about making better decisions faster. If you find the sweet spot between those two against your opponent, you can defeat them. And the thing I really got out of this, like politically as well as personally, was like Boyd's prime directive is always do that which expands your independent capacity for action. Because what that means is you can always adapt to whatever's going on in your circumstance, right? If you're not overly committed to a tactic, right? Well, we just have always knocked and called, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to knock and call. We've always done petitions at the farmer's market, so we're always going to, that's what we've always done, that's what we'll do. It's think creatively and adapt your tactics. And think about a way where you can implement your theory of change creatively, right? And whoever kind of maintains their independence and their ability to adapt in this loop and makes these loops faster, you're going to win. You're going to beat your opponents, right? So, now I'm going to tell you about the generations of warfare. Not so you can go and wage war on a foreign country, but because it'll inform us about what we're doing politically, right? And I'll explain the political connection second, but I'm going to tell you about generations of warfare first. So Boyd goes through all the generations of warfare, and he says, look, the first generation of warfare was just symmetrical combat. You line up all your people and all your weapons, we line up all our people and our weapons, have it out, and whoever's standing wins, right? So the principle of first generation warfare is just to overpower your opponents. It's very simple. Second generation warfare is to defeat them in detail. This is like Napoleonic conflict. So what Napoleon realizes, like, if you line up against each other, right, what you want to do is actually line up some guys over there, and then at some point call those guys in and flank, right? So you have two lines of attack coming in, and what the opponent force does is they go like this. And so one is fighting this flank, and then one is fighting the main thrust of combat. And he said, when I saw the army turn, the opponent army turn, that's when I knew we had won, right? Because at the point where they've turned, you can have an overwhelming force in two areas of conflict. What that means is, like, if I only have 10 guys against an army of 100, then I need to figure out a way to pick off 5 guys and use my 10 guys against their 5 guys, right? This is divide and conquer, essentially. This is where divide and conquer comes from, right? Am I explaining that clearly, or is it a little murky? Yeah? Third generation warfare. The guy named Clausewitz says, okay, not only do you want to flank and divide them, what you actually want to do is go behind enemy lines and grab a high ground, right? Because behind enemy lines, they have to attack to defend themselves. They're like, oh my God, they're behind our lines, you know? But you hold the high ground, which means, like, they keep attacking, and you're looking down at them, and in military parlance, it's like easier to shoot them, right? So there's a political equivalent that's not violent, I promise we'll get there, okay? And then fourth generation warfare is guerrilla psychological warfare or asymmetrical warfare. And the goal of that is to collapse your adversary's will to resist. So does anybody remember like the Persian Gulf War in the mid-90s where we dropped all these flyers and said, hey, we'll treat you even better than Saddam Hussein will. So instead of having gunfights with his Revolutionary Guard, we had them coming out with white flags and they like came over. We essentially, they had the guns, but they didn't even pick them up to use them because we had collapsed their will to resist, right? Okay, so here's the political analogy of all this. By the way, there's a fifth generation warfare, which is like beyond void, which is like total information warfare, which is why everybody's like, all the governments are trying to hit your Facebook and Twitter, but it's an argument for another day. So, first generation warfare, how does this apply politically? You want to overpower your opponents. Now, we can get more volunteers and more money and make more knocks and more calls, right? That's about every political campaign or electoral campaign you've ever heard of, right? So what I want you to understand is we're stuck in the first generation of warfare, right? We just want to get more, just more money, more people, more calls, more knocks, right? And we'll just overpower our opponents. It's like saying we just need more guns, more cannons, more people, right? Let's conscript them. So we're stuck here. The second generation of warfare, what we can learn from them is it's just as advantageous to have your opponents fighting with themselves as it is to fight your opponents, right? You kind of intuitively understand this. But if we can ever get them turned against each other, like we can have Steve Bannon fighting with Donald Trump, I'm like, hallelujah, you know? Like, there is hope, right? Because if they're fighting with each other, you can just step back and then watch the carnage, right? So defeating them in detail is kind of about figuring out places we can turn them against each other, or also figuring out ways where maybe we can't beat them in Georgia right now, but we can probably beat them in Vermont, right? So how can we have a localized conflict where we can, make some change? Maybe we can't beat them in Congress, but we can beat them at the state legislature, right? Think of places where we can, localized campaigns where we can overpower the opposition. And then gain the high ground. This is one of my favorites because like the immigration messaging is actually built out of this concept. It's how do we grab the moral high ground and provoke them to attack us while we hold it, right? Which we'll talk a little bit later. But grabbing the high ground in politics means grabbing the moral high ground, right? So if they're talking about rule of law, that's their high ground. But then we sneak in and we're like, actually, when we're talking about immigration, we're talking about freedom. That's a superior moral high ground. And then when they come and they attack me while I'm holding that moral high ground, like a dreamer got up and he talked to a room full of like senior citizens at a assisted living facility, right? And he got up and he said, I'm just like you, I'm just like your kids. I got straight A's, I want to be a doctor, and I want to help people. And this guy stood up and he was like, no, you're not. You are not like us. You are not. He was like a Tea Party guy. Everybody in that room was like, oh my God, like mouth agape. Like, they were like, I relate to that kid, not to that horrible person. You know what I mean? So if you would grab a moral high ground, your enemy attacks while you hold that moral high ground, it actually hurts them. It becomes self-destructive, right? Your enemy's going to attack. Our adversaries are going to attack us. They're going to punch you. You're in a boxing fight, right? So they're going to punch you. Just try to get the high ground when they do it. And then collapsing your adversary's will to resist. My favorite thing about the conservatives in this country is when you finally do defeat them, all of that barking, like it's no bite, right? Like LGBT rights get like solidified into law in this country. And like you see them like going on Fox News, they're just like, oh, I guess we've lost the culture war. Eeyore, And I'm just like, that is collapsing their will to resist. They don't even want to pick up their arguments to fight anymore, right? That's what we want to be doing. It's not about collapsing their will to exist, right? I don't want to psychologically destroy people. I do want to collapse their will to resist us politically on these very important issues. Because as long as they're resisting and implementing their vision in the world, their vision is becoming reality, and that's hurting people, right? And I want to stop that from happening. But collapsing your adversary's will to resist, and just making so it's not even an argument anymore. Choice was like this a few years back until kind of recently in the last decade or so. Like it was just a settled argument, even the Republicans agreed. They're like, okay, yeah, it's a right. Okay, let's get over it. Supreme Court decided it. But they brought the argument back out. But we get to a point where it's just no longer even a debate, right? That's where we want it to be. This is a concept called the support spectrum. It comes out of a book that I really learned from this guy, Paul Engler. His brother Mark wrote a book called This is an Uprising. And it's the spectrum of allies. So what happens is there's kind of like 5 groups of people you want to think about. There's active allies. It's like people like you and me. I really care about these political issues. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to take action. I'm going to rally. I'm active and I agree with you. Then there's passive allies. There's people that if you tell them they go to the rally, they're like, that's awesome. And you're like, you want to come? They're like, no, I'm good. We know those people, right? They're passive allies, okay? They have a place too. And I'll tell you where that is in a second. Then there's people in the middle that are like neutral. They're just ambivalent. Remember all those ambivalent people? 50% of Americans just don't even care about immigration either way, okay? Then there's the passive opposition. They believe, unlike us, but they're not really willing to do anything about it. They don't really talk about it, right? And then there's the active opposition. These are the people that are like us, but just on the other side, right? They're willing to take action. They're going to go to rallies. They're going to organize in their communities to do the things that we don't want to see happen in our communities, right? And they're committed to their position, right? Just like the people kind of in the immigration thing, they're like, no matter what you say, they're going to actively oppose us, right? And here's where the two kind of really connect. The support spectrum is so valuable in the sense that what you want to realize is your goal is to engage these active allies, right? That's your first goal. Remember brand advocates engaging the base, okay? Then you want to engage them to talk to the passive allies to convert passive allies into active allies, right? So people that are talking good, I'll be like, okay, it's the 5th time I'm asking you to go to the rally. You say you care about immigrants. I need you to show up this time. You need to activate them.
Chicken?
Yeah, what are you, chicken? Then there's people in the middle. Do we want to get them to be active allies? Do we want people that are like, you're like, how do you feel about immigrants? They're like, I don't care about an immigrant. You're like, you want to come to an immigrants rights march with me?
How about getting you to be passive allies?
How about getting them to be passive allies, right? So what we want to do is move the people in the middle to just be passive allies. They're like, okay, I know you're not going to come to march with me, but you admit immigrants are pretty awesome, right? That they really make America great. And they're like, yes, I agree. But I'm still not going to your rally. You're like, cool, don't worry about it. Then we want to move the passive opposition to neutrality, right? So we don't need the passive opposition to agree with us, right? They don't believe like us. But if we at least get them to just like shut the hell up, you know, about it, like, well, immigrants aren't there. They're like, you know, we should get rid of all these people, it hurts the economy. You know, actually, I think, you know, people move. It's been true throughout history. You know, I don't know why you're giving people such a hard time. It's hard to move, you know? They're like, yeah, maybe you're right. Yeah, I guess. Whatever, I'll just not talk about this anymore. Awesome. You're not trying to move them into active alliance, right? You're just trying to move them to neutrality, right? And then with our active opposition, what we want to do is kind of, notice how there's no arrow here going up here? We kind of want to like pull them out, right? Because they're going to stay active. If we can get them to be passive allies, that's good, but you're not really targeting them. There's nothing we can really do with these folks. What we can do is as we pull everyone this way, these people get marginalized, right? So until very recently in this country, overt racists were incredibly marginalized, right? It was like embarrassing to talk about it. And people, like, no matter where you were in the country, would be like, that is some racist talk. That's just not appropriate, right? Trump has given license to all kinds of freak shows, but you know, that's kind of where we want, is we want people to like feel like, I'm not sure I should actually talk about this because I'm going to be ostracized for hating other people for how they were born, which, you know, I kind of want them to feel that way, so that they don't talk about it. And the point of spectrum of allies is you can't move people really but one step. You know, there is a passive opponent out there that can become an active ally. It happens, but it happens over a very long timeline with a lot of work and probably individual conversations. What we want to be doing in our day-to-day activism is just kind of understanding where somebody sits. Are they an active ally? Okay, great, now we need to organize with them. Are they a passive ally? Okay, let's try and turn them into an active ally. Are they ambivalent? Don't try and turn them into an active ally. Make sure you don't turn them into active opposition, by the way, right? You want to just turn them into a passive ally, realizing that everybody can go at most probably about one step next, right? They're gonna become neutral before they become a passive ally. So just realize everybody goes about one step at a time. Okay? And try and move people in that way. And if you think about who fits in these slots when you're talking to them, it kind of helps you understand the goal of talking to them a lot better, right? It's not trying to get Bubba, who doesn't like immigrants, to come to the immigrants' rights march, right? It's trying to get them to shut the hell up. Okay, so this is a concept called the Pillars of Support. It comes from Gene Sharp. He wrote a book called From Dictatorship to Democracy and many, many others. What he says is a lot of times we think about power as like a monolith, like the Washington Monument, right? Like it's this big tower, right? He says that's actually not how power works. If you've ever worked inside government or you know how they fall, He says, power is really like a Greco-Roman temple, right? And so you have the power of the regime on top, and then you have all these columns of support, right? And the columns of support are very similar in every country. There's police, military, judiciary, civil servants, education system, religious institutions, and the media. And what Gene Sharp says is, if you go to a country and you look at the regime that looks like this all-powerful, it'll last forever, 30-year dictatorship, and you understand that the people that prop that up are actually the people in the community that fit in these columns, if you can start pulling away these columns one at a time, right? You don't even have to pull away all of them, right? If you can start pulling them away one at a time, the regime collapses on itself, right? So you're kind of seeing that with Trump now. I'll give you some examples, like with the military going after the family, Kaiser Khan's family, right? And military service member who died in his family. A lot of the military didn't like that, right? If you look at the educational system right now with what is his stance on guns and going after Parkland and like making it about himself somehow, there's teachers and students throughout the country that are starting to really tear down this column of support, right? And he's lost a lot of civil servants, the Twitter accounts that have come out from people inside the government saying, we don't support this guy, or just quitting their jobs in protest. And in the military as well. You see that a lot of these columns of support are falling, and eventually the regime collapses if it loses enough columns of support. So bringing it all together, this is what grand strategy means. It means you want to align your tactics to your strategy, right? Creatively align them over time to go towards your goals that eventually reaches and creates the vision of the world that you wish to create. So if our tactics are out of alignment with our strategy, if I want to pass a bill, but what I'm doing is going to the farmer's market and getting petition signatures from a district where the guy already supports, the state legislator already supports what we're doing. That tactic isn't really strategic, right? So we need to be thinking about a strategy. Maybe it's a committee chairman that needs to give our bill a hearing. So what we need to do is talk to one of his constituents to call him, and then they'll give us what we want, right? They'll let the bill have a hearing. So you need to make sure your tactics are in alignment with your strategy. You also need to make sure your strategy is in alignment with your goals. If you win, are you actually going to create the change you want to see in the world, right? Because you can have goals that are good, but if you want to save the world from climate change, that's a noble goal. But if maybe a carbon tax wouldn't get us there, right? Maybe it won't actually stop the problem soon enough. So maybe we need to have bolder goals, right? Or we need to have a different strategy that can actually affect the change that we wish to see. And then our goals need to lead to our vision, right? So if we actually get our goal, we get a carbon tax, and it doesn't prevent the problem from, us going above the 350 mark, then maybe we need to think a little bit differently about the fact that our goals don't lead to our vision. But especially if you start getting yourself wrapped up in different tasks, not involved. Oh, what are we going to do? We're going to go help elect this politician who's kind of moderate on our issue on the environment. And then that politician gets elected, and they don't do anything. They actually side with the opponents. Well, then we spend a whole lot of time working for that politician for their interests, but then we don't get what we needed out of the equation, right? So we need to change something. And so all grand strategy is just about making sure that you're arranging your tactics in a strategic way to achieve your goals that will eventually create your vision of the world. So make sure when you're creating your grand strategy that you're keeping that in alignment. And the three things that Boyd talks about a good grand strategy have or will do is when this is in alignment over here, you will expand your alliances. You will bring more people in to your movement, right? You will increase your internal cohesion. The people that are inside will be more committed to each other. They will feel esprit de corps, right? They will feel like they're in this fight together and that we can win. And it will deepen the resolve of our people, right? When our vision is in alignment with our goal, strategy, and tactics, we will be more resolved. We will think this is going to win and this is going to work and we can actually achieve victory. On the other hand, we want to undermine the alliances of our adversaries. So divide and conquer, right? We do want to split them. I want Steve Bannon fighting with Donald Trump every day, don't you? Right? So we want to decrease their internal cohesion. I want Breitbart going after Donald Trump, right? And weaken their resolve. It's not even worth fighting over gay rights anymore in this country. It's just a losing proposition, so they just stop doing it, right? We want to weaken the resolve. But then here's the most interesting part, this is the one I kind of struggle with, is you want to win without sowing the seeds of future conflict. The hard part. How do you win to create your vision, but not demoralize your opposition so intensely that they feel that you get a backlash effect, right? When we won, when George Bush got elected, he created these conditions that elected Barack Obama, right? And the pendulum swung. But then the election of Barack Obama swung back and elected Trump, right? So how do we figure out how to avoid that backlash effect? How do we weaken the resolve rather than intensify the resolve when we win, right? Because winning the wrong way does matter, right? Because it can make the next fight even harder, right? We thought Bush was bad, okay? Now we know. Still bad, but there could be worse. So you want to win without sowing the seeds of future conflict, and that's a really hard task politically. So Chuck Spinner was an acolyte of John Boyd, the fighter pilot, and he wrote this great article in Counterpunch called "Motherhood and Mismatch: How Obama Won." I recommend everybody read it. Just how Obama won in Counterpunch. He says, this is the strategy I learned from John Boyd. This is what we essentially developed at the Pentagon. That what you want to do is you want to grab a motherhood position. Apple pie. We're here for the puppies. I'm pro-puppy, aren't you?
Yeah.
And we're here for the kids, as a common one we'll hear. A motherhood position, right? An unassailable and positive moral high ground, right? That should be our position. And then what you want to do is create mismatches on the other side. The charge of hypocrisy when landed on a politician is one of the most devastating charges you can get, because what it says is you say you're one thing, but you're actually another. Right? Who you say you are and who you actually are two different things. And especially I think in representational democracy, this becomes such a devastating charge to land, because people trust you to represent them. So they don't know what you feel on every issue, but they assume you share their values. And then when you show that mismatch between who they said they are, who they actually are, then people don't trust them to represent their values, right? So we want to create mismatches on our opponents. We want to expose those mismatches. I'm not creating it, right? I didn't make Donald Trump say he's a great businessman when he's bankrupted I don't know how many businesses, right? I didn't make him say that, but I can't expose it. Just remember, the most important thing is we want to be grabbing that motherhood position, right? And then creating mismatches on the other side. We definitely don't want to be living in mismatches on our side, right? We don't want to be hypocrites. We don't want to have our vision out of alignment with our tactics, right? We don't want to be working in organizations and progressive politics that have sexual harassers leading them, for example, right? So we want to make sure that we are getting rid of the mismatches that we have, and that we're holding a moral high ground and not attacking our adversaries when they hold a moral high ground too, right? If they're holding the motherhood position, don't attack them, it's a trap. And then, since we're a church, I thought I'd give a shout out to the good book. The beautiful thing about a moral high ground position is, there's a verse that says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And it's because of that prevention of harm goals that I was telling you about, right? If you give people prevention of harm goals, you're tapping into their reptilian brain, telling them there's something you should be afraid about in your immediate environment, right? And if I tell you we have to stop this really bad thing from happening, I'm going to demobilize you. You're going to stay right where you are. But where there is a vision that people mobilize, if you can show people a beautiful vision of a world that's going to be better when we get there, they will work with you, especially if you keep focused on that, right? And let your adversaries attack you. They're going to attack you anyways, right? And you're going to attack your vision. Let them attack you, but do it on our own terms. Do it when we're setting a vision of a America and a world that looks so much better than it does now, and let other people see them attack us when we just want a more just, fair, and equitable and free world, right? I think that's a good thing. And people will join us if we lead with our vision, lead with our values, not lead with the problems that we see in the world. Anat likes to say, Martin Luther King said, I have a dream, not I have a complaint. So we got to be giving people the dream too, right? That's a big part of providing that purpose in the face of uncertainty. So we're going to talk about visionary victory. I'm going to take questions first this time, and then we're going to do an exercise. But when we do that, we want to identify the moral high ground. Really, this is about vision. What's the vision of the future, right? What does the future look like when you get in that time machine? and be specific, right? Not, more people have healthcare. Be like, everyone has healthcare and it costs $0, okay? Like, get crazy. I want you to be crazy because we can create a better world. Identify the spectrum of support. So who are our allies and adversaries, right? Who are the passive allies for the passive supporters? Who are the natural constituencies for these groups on that spectrum of support? Then identify the goal line. This is really important. What does it look like when we win, right? Because I think a lot of organizations don't necessarily define this, and then we just keep fighting, and then it doesn't really matter what tactics we're using because we're just doing something, and there is no theory of change, right? It's okay to go sign people at the farmer's market when that doesn't have any impact, when you don't know when you've won or lost. I want to know defeat. I want to know when we've lost. I want to know when it didn't work, because that's the key to adaptation, right? That's why we're going to change what we're doing and figure out something new and creative and get new tactics and get a new strategy. And then you want to create a grand strategy. How do you arrange your tactics to achieve strategic goals? Again, not your tactics that would be available one day when we have $1 million. I don't have $1 million. Does anybody have $1 million? No? Okay, cool. I was just checking. Arrange the tactics you have right now to achieve a strategic goal, right, in your community.
It is a world about to change. When tomorrow